I was being approached. When my father left the Air Force, I was 12 years old. I'd been in boarding school for some years, which really, my father used to say the woman around the boarding school was drummed out of the SS for cruelty. It was a very post-Second World War boarding school, and it was very harsh. And I was very relieved to get back with my family, and my father bought this lovely house on Wiltshire countryside. But it was very soon that I was getting visitations from what I now know to have been E.T., but at the time, I was just terrorized. I just felt such fear. And whenever I tried to explain it to my parents, it just meant that I was nuts from their perspective, so I had to hide it and pretend. And I had to become someone I wasn't. I had to be avaricious, I had to be acquisitive, I had to be professional, I had to show the materialistic symbols of success. And so I spent a long time, I feel, in the wrong place. And eventually it resulted in 1987, when the first activation of light body for everyone occurred, it threw me into a 10-year illness. You know, at the time they were calling it ME, fibromyalgia. I was bedridden for a year, and I was disabled for 10. And it's only in latter years that I've been told it's because I resisted the energy that they were trying to give to me at that point. And it was during one of those episodes that I had a near-death experience. And I was ready to go, to be honest. But when it came to it, I guess I panicked and made all kinds of promises. And they said, well, you've kind of forgotten what you came here to do. Do you think you should come back and be recalled and we'll do this again? I said, no, I'll do it. So I kind of got past that. And once I'd had that experience, I recovered very quickly. And in part of my recovery was realizing that the energy in where I was living in England was not supporting me. And I'd always had a desire to go to the US. We came here just for a few days at the end of a holiday tour of the East Coast. We landed for the last 2 days on Martha's Vineyard, and my only reason for being there really was I'd seen a Carly Simon concert from Martha's Vineyard and thought I really should go there. But I discovered what I now know to be energy. Even then I couldn't have told you it was energy. That I felt great on the vineyard and knew I had to be there. I had no money, and I'd been disabled for 10 years. I hadn't worked. I had nothing. And on paper, it made no sense. But I persuaded my husband that midlife crisis is the gateway to happiness. And if we just sell everything we've got and we head out there and open an English tea shop, we'll be good. So it kind of started with that, because I was first approached by my guides very gently in the tea shop about tea leaf reading, which actually Archangel Michael used to enjoy doing with me at that time. But I had literally not heard of yoga. I had not heard of Reiki. I did not know there was an angelic realm in 205. So a huge amount has happened since that time in what I would call sort of a boot camp of experience and education. And I do remember having the conversation of, aren't I too old for this now? And they said, the question is irrelevant and the answer serves no purpose. You're here now. So there were, from my understanding, 8 others that had been prepared on the planet's surface to receive this energy. But I was the only one who was ready when the time came. And the way it was presented to me, I had, through the tea leaf reading, I had been introduced to Reiki, and I'd taken my Reiki symbols, but things were happening in my healing practice, which were very different from Reiki, I was being told. And I was doing psychic surgeries, and I did some Brennanite work as well. And then I realized that people could only be healed to a certain level if you couldn't access their subconscious mind, because what they were holding in their mental bodies was impacting their health. And so I became a hypnotherapist. And then I explored past life and in-between life hypnosis. And that's really when it all cracked open for me. And during one of my sessions, I was contacted by the Palladians in the run-up to 2012. And we were all expecting huge things of 2012, namely Cataclysm was high on my list. And they were basically sort of trying to say to me that lightworkers were not ready, that they had promised they would be, but they hadn't woken up. And they were very much part of the enslavement matrix. They had still had this belief that they needed to give healings free. And because of this, they weren't able to support themselves to be able to do it full time. And the work wasn't getting done. And it was by way of a warning at that time that you are not ready, and that this is the last attempt to take this planet to light. If we don't make it this lifetime, we will not make it at all. So in the months that followed that, in a dream space, I experienced Marconics for the first time. A guide ran the energy through me, and I said, what is that? And he said, Marconics. And a few days later, I had another dream with another guide, a female guide this time, and she touched her foot with my foot, and the energy went right the way through my body. And I said, "What is it?" And she said, "It's Marconics." So I thought, well, I better Google Marconics and go get myself a class. And which I did, of course, and there's nothing out there. Marconics was not out there. What I kept getting was Marconi, who is sort of Tesla's counterpart. And well, that just seemed too easy and unlikely, so I disregarded it completely and thought, well, it can't be that. The guy invented radio. I mean, how can that be, how can that be the same thing? But I told a friend of mine, and she didn't let it go. She did some more investigating, and she came back to me and she said, do you know that Marconi was the most recent person in living history to understand that you could harness radio waves from space? And that in the 30s, he developed a beam which he demonstrated outside of Milan to Mussolini. And apparently Marconi had most recently been able to help the Pope give his first radio broadcast. So he was quite well known at that time. And he demonstrated this beam. He switched this beam on, and it sent out electromagnetic pulse that stopped all the cars on the road coming out of Milan at that time. Mussolini's wife was in one of those cars, and it's mentioned in her memoirs. Marconi was very interested in how this could be used specifically for healing, but Mussolini knew there was a war coming and was interested in it for weaponry. So the Pope told Mussolini to shut Marconi down in a very big way. Didn't like the way this was going. And so Marconi actually told me that he faked his death in 1937, and he sailed his floating laboratory, the Electra, to Venezuela, where he worked with a number of other scientists on sort of retro-engineering of anti-gravity and these beams, this harnessing of energies and frequencies from space. He'd studied a lot about the work that Hertz had done. And so this was where his work was going. And then after the war, about 95 scientists that were kind of released at the end of the war from the German occupation joined him in Venezuela, where he continued. And so it was very much to do with Marconics. And after my friend had shown me this information, she'd also managed to get a photograph from the Library of Congress of Marconi. And I'd realized that a couple of nights earlier, I'd been on a train with him, an old steam train, and he'd been talking to me then. So I knew then that it was Marconi. A couple of nights after that, my father, who died in 2010, was an RAF pilot, but when he joined the Air Force, he was a radio engineer. And he turned up in a dream state showing me this beautiful 1930s radio and pointing to it and said, "You do not understand the power of radio frequencies yet." And as it progressed, I was told that I was accessing energy from what was now what they called a newly completed infrared system of space. Infrared system of space is light that is invisible to the human eye, and it's a much wider spectrum than the narrow spectrum that we use to see with in this dimension. And it contains radio waves, gamma ray, infrared, microwave. It contains everything of the electromagnetic spectrum. So we were not pulling down one frequency. We were pulling down a wide spectrum of light frequencies. And this light, they were explaining, was emanating from deep space. And as it travels through space at speed, it slows as it approaches a planet, and the gravity of the planet creates an arcing of the light. And as the light travels in an arc, it travels at 144,000 miles per hour. And that this was going to be very important in terms of the frequencies and the corresponding dimensions that I was going to be working in. So what we've come to understand since, and I'm sure that you've probably been aware of prion of magnetic service, magnetism is conscious, and so is electricity. And in terms of what is going on in our bodies right now, Kundalini requires both to be able to move up through the chakras. Half your body is actually processing magnetically, and half of your body is processing electrically. And so it needs for the human energy field to interact with this light-encoded frequency in a way that a seed under the earth needs to interact with the sun and with the rain in order for the DNA to become activated there are many modalities prior to 2012 that are simply only designed for the three-dimensional experience and for the three-dimensional template, the template that uses what we have become familiar with knowing as the meridian system. It requires something much greater to be able to activate what has lain dormant in our subtle bodies for a long, long time, which is the Axi-A-Tonal system, in order that it can reconnect back into the Axi-B-Tonal system, which is essentially the crystalline grid, as it permeates down through 12 dimensions. And then as it reaches up beyond that into the universal grid, which is the Aci-C-Tonal system, to be able to access these light frequencies. It's not something that can happen automatically because the global collective has not chosen ascension.